this anxiety, the kids tell me that they feel like everything around them is going to kill them. It's out of control, worry or fear, which is manifested in a what-if narrative, and the mind races. You can't think straight, you can't concentrate, you always feel on edge or nervous.
Hello, I'm Dr Jodie Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, lovely listener. Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Dr. Jodie Richardson. I'm an anxiety and wellbeing speaker and the best-selling co-author of Anxious Kids and author of Anxious Mums. Here today to talk to us today about the alarming rates of child and adolescent anxiety, the struggles that families are enduring, school refusal, just so painful for the young people and their families and their teachers, is the wonderful Dr Michael-Carr Gregg. Michael and I had the absolute joy of touring Australia together with the Positive Schools Conference in 2022, which was wonderful. And I've had the privilege of hearing him speak on many occasions, not to mention his regular spot on 3AW on a Wednesday at 10:45. Michael is also a speaker, he's an author, he is a mental health advocate and a child and adolescent psychologist here in Melbourne. So welcome, Michael. Thank you for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Jodie.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'll just add to that Michael is a renowned media commentator here in Australia. And Michael, what are you seeing so you've got your feet on the ground, you're a child and adolescent psychologist, you've got patients that you see regularly, but you're also well connected with schools and families. What sort of anxiety levels are you seeing, and what are families going through at the moment?
Well, it's such a good question. I think young people in Australia have sought support at record levels for mental health issues, including obviously anxiety and depression and self-harm and eating disorders post-COVID. And I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I think the needs of young people were overlooked during the nation's pandemic response. And this is a really difficult time for a lot of young people who, particularly in Melbourne, where we had the longest lockdown in the world, they not only missed out on 2 years of school, but 2 years of really important socialisation. And the mental health pandemic, I think, has a very, very long tail. So it's never been as bad now in my entire career in terms of the need, and of course our ability to meet that need is just not there. So there are a lot of people out there suffering and not getting the help they want.
It's interesting to think back because I'm Melbourne-based like yourself and I have 2 children, so we lived it. So it was really interesting from the perspective of a professional in this space, but a parent first and always. And our children were year 4 and year 6 when the pandemic began, and even the least likely of our 2 children to struggle with mental health, I could just see, if you picture a staircase, it was just going down the staircase to the point where if something didn't give, then we were on a road to a whole lot of extra help required. And of course, she's got a parent like me who can really help and does everything I can to support mental health and wellbeing. So, we lived it, and no doubt the families that you see and the people that I connect with, just friends as well, and school parents, it's really, really tough. And it's created some very serious challenges for kids and families, hasn't it?
Well, it has. And it's so interesting to hear of your experience, because one of the things that I'm dealing with at the moment is school refusal, because the rates are soaring. In Victoria, the rate has grown by 50% in the 3 years just to 2021. And we've now got almost 12,000 students in government schools officially absent. And I think there is a genuine and understandable concern about potentially a lost generation of children who, at a very critical stage of their development, didn't get the support they needed because we didn't have in place the scaffolding that was required.
And it's interesting, school refusal, because I've heard it termed school can't and school phobia. And I was able to interview the founder of the school refusal clinic in Bayside, and he was able to say that it's not a matter of won't, it's just this complete inability. Can you talk to us a little bit about, for those that are struggling with this in their families, but also people who might sort of think, well, why don't you just drop them off and make them? Can you help people to understand a little bit more about what's sort of going on when school refusal is a challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the basis of all school refusal is a child motivated inability to attend school or a difficulty to remain at school. And this behaviour is different from truanting in that this is not about not wanting to participate in life. It is an inability to manage the stress and anxiety related to going. So, I mean, it's characterised by avoidance and huge emotional distress at the time of attending school. And I think there is nothing that is so difficult for parents. And I've seen marriages break up. I've seen people lose their jobs as a result of this. I think it takes an underestimated toll on families in this situation. And it's about 1 to 2% of the general population and about 5% as you get a bit older. So God only knows what the rates are in actuality now, because obviously we're not doing the research right now, but I suspect it will be double. And was it John Chalou that you talked to?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, great guy. And he said that demand on his clinic has doubled in the last year. So you can see how dreadful it is.
Yes, and I do personally know of somebody who is experiencing school refusal with one of her children, and it's been over a year. So it's this ripple effect, isn't it, of well beyond the child's experience. It has a really big ripple effect of other people around them.
Yeah, and I think that's true. What we have to aim for isn't avoidance, but a sort of graduated exposure to school with appropriate support so that we can actually get the young person to tolerate the distress and manage in increments the anxiety. And I've had a lot of success over the years, but it took a long time and a lot of energy, which is expended by parents. And some parents just simply don't have the resources to do that now.
Anxiety being at the heart of school refusal, and of course, it's an alarming problem amongst children and adolescents. And as you said, the data over ensuing months and years will be so telling. We already know that it's an overwhelming problem. Can you talk to us about anxiety? I always love to hear professionals such as yourself share how you would talk to a parent or a young person about anxiety, because it really helps to reinforce this learning. Because the more we understand it, the better equipped we will be to be able to tolerate it and move forward with it.
Okay, so I describe anxiety to parents as a really uncomfortable feeling of worry or fear, which of course is a normal human response to a lot of situations. Everyone feels some anxiety at different times in life. And you, in your speeches, have so beautifully shared your own personal experience. And I think it is the way our body tries to keep us out of dangerous situation and motivates us to solve problems. So that I always say that there's good anxiety and there's bad anxiety. The anxiety you'd feel if you were running across the southeastern arterial at 6 p.m. is a good anxiety, because you're going to be very, very motivated not to be squished by the cars and your feeling of impending danger is probably going to be the thing that keeps you alive. So it's like having a smoke alarm which appropriately goes off when there is smoke. The difficulty with an anxiety disorder in kids is there's this constant feeling of danger when there is in fact no danger. So the smoke alarm, if you like, is going off all the time. And the tricky thing about anxiety is it's a logic-free zone. There isn't the capacity to sit down when someone's having a big panic attack and describe to them in detail what is actually the definition of an anxiety disorder and the DSM 5 characteristics of separation anxiety, social anxiety, generalized anxiety. That's not what you should be doing. The truth is that we need to make sure that we teach young people how to manage their anxiety. And part of this is cognitive behavioral therapy, where you can't have a feeling unless you have a thought. And so I talk to my clients about unhelpful thinking and helpful thinking. And there is a huge amount of resources online now for those kids. I particularly love the BRAVE program by the University of Queensland and, of course, Mood Gym by ANU, which are online programs which can really make a difference to the well-being of these young people. And, of course, they can access that therapy in between my sessions, which is brilliant. So that's the way in which I explain it to the families, and I try and give them a lot of psychoeducation around that, because I don't think good psychology can happen without information being given to them for them to absorb.
Thank you very much for sharing that explanation of anxiety and really reinforcing this idea that it feels bloody awful. It's a horrible, horrible feeling. And it's so interesting what you were saying, because I was actually had a flight talk about anxiety. But do you know what? I was really proud of myself, Michael, because I flew to Sydney on Thursday to surprise a friend, Dr. Christy Goodwin, for her book launch. And my plane took off at noon. I didn't land in Sydney till 5 because we circled, headed back to Canberra, flew back. And so my window of being able to go to this event and then fly home that evening was narrowing very quickly. And my anxiety was, because I was able to focus on what I could and can't control, then I was better able to tolerate the discomfort of that experience. And then later in the evening, as the flight got cancelled, the flight home got cancelled, and I was stuck in Sydney with no luggage and no way of getting home. Again, I was able just to recognise the uncomfortable feeling in my body, and I know how it affects me. And the more we learn about our own personal response, the more we're able to say, oh, this is anxiety. And my psychologist used to say, it's only anxiety. And I didn't understand what he meant by that for so long. And then eventually I thought, yeah, actually, I'm not in danger. It's only anxiety. I know what this is and I know what to do about it. And it's a really powerful place to come from. So your clients working with you are working, I mean, I spend a lot of time with my psychologist. It takes time, doesn't it? But it's possible.
Well, it is. And I love your example of the airport. A couple of weeks ago, was caught up in a flood in Auckland, where the airport literally became a swimming pool, and I had to spend a night and a day sleeping on the floor of the upstairs of Auckland International Airport. There wasn't any water or food, and that was a truly stressful situation. But it's amazing how you can then use a lot of what you've been teaching people over the years for yourself, and you can manage that situation. So I sympathise and empathise with your plight. I guess the most important thing is really helping parents know what to do in that situation. And I know that you've got amazing advice and resources, and your books are incredible to help people. And I think you and I are on exactly the same tram in terms of giving advice to parents, and there's just simply not enough of it around.
Thank you for saying so. And there's so much need. There's so much need. And that's why today I'm ever so grateful for your time, sharing your time and your expertise, because this is my way of helping more people connect with what they need to know in a way that's free and accessible, and it feels more personal because podcast is such a personal medium. And so on that note, what's your advice to parents? How can you support parents who are just at their wits' end and feeling stressed and anxious themselves? What do you say to parents? How can you support them today?
Well, the first thing is I listen very carefully to the nature and extent of their concerns. I acknowledge and validate those concerns, because sometimes I think people dismiss, and that's not helpful. So I spend a lot of time listening, feeding back to them, and acknowledging and validating what's going on. Then we talk about what they've been doing, and they usually say, well, what I've been doing hasn't worked. And what they're trying to do most often is reassure. And of course, saying, trust me, there's nothing to worry about, doesn't work with anxiety, because reassurance falls on deaf ears. The anxious brain won't let that happen. The prefrontal cortex, the sort of logical part of the brain, gets put on hold, while the more automated emotional part of the brain tends to take over. In other words, it's really hard for children and adolescents in that anxious moment to think clearly, to use logic, or even remember how to complete really basic tasks. So I try and get them to make a commitment to me that for a couple of weeks, we're going to run an experiment, because what parents do is terribly, terribly important. And all the research says in the really critical anxiety disorders in children, the thing that works best is parental education, cognitive behavioural therapy, and sometimes medication. Those three together really is the best combination. So I would urge all of those parents, after I've validated and acknowledged what's going on, I urge them to get informed. And one way that they can do that very quickly is hopping on to that Brave program, because there's a lovely parent component of the Brave program. And so I ask them to have a look at that and then come back to me with their questions. So that's the psychoeducation part. And then what I'll often do with the kid is I'll get them to talk about their worries to me, and I'll sit them down and ask them to make me a worry list. And that's a list of all their worries and fears, both little and big. And just the act of recognizing and writing down those worries can sometimes make those scary emotions seem a lot less intimidating for my client. And it allows me and the parents to identify which of those worries and fears are the big ones that we need to work on, and we can just tackle them one by one. And then we talk about the various techniques, the fun techniques, which we can introduce that work really, really well. And I've heard you talk about shutting down the fight-flight response with breathing, and I think many of us as adults benefit from just taking a bit of a breath sometimes to calm our busy mind, and teaching children the stress breath, where you pretend for a second that you're smelling a rose and you're breathing in through your nose, holding it, putting your chin on your chest for about 3 seconds, and then pretending that you're blowing out a candle. This makes it real. And to practice that simple technique with my clients, and whether or not you do the 5-3-5, so in for 5, hold for 3, out for 5, or whatever combination works for you, there's nothing that I know that can help us as much as that. That combined with the cognitive behavioural therapy and colouring books and all of the techniques that you use, I think that over time, with a bit of assistance, you can really make a difference to the lives of these people. And I want to make it clear, this anxiety in its purest form, these anxiety disorders, the kids tell me that they feel like everything around them is going to kill them. It's out of control, worry or fear, which is manifested in a what if narrative. And the mind races. So you can't think straight, you can't concentrate, you always feel on edge or nervous, and you can often get into those dreadful panic attacks, which of course are absolutely awful. But people have to understand that there's some people who have these short-lived, sometimes these anxieties stay with them for a long time. But there are four things that I want young people to be able to do. If I think about your children, for example, if you brought them to me and I was assessing them, there are four things that I'd check straight away. Do they have friends and the capacity to make friends? And are they hanging out with them? Pro-social peers, crucial. Secondly, are they attending school and getting the point of school? Are they taking healthy risks, what my friend Steve Biddulph used to call sparks, islands of competence, art, music, dance, drama, sport? These extracurricular activities, crucial. And last of all, are they in the process of emancipating from you and figuring out who they are? Those four things to me are critical. Anxiety stops all four of those key developmental tasks in their tracks.
Interestingly, I've been reading through the Camp Australia research. It's called the Child Impact Survey, which no doubt you've seen. And right at the top of the concerns, significant concerns for parents and educational leaders are screen time, friendships, and mental wellbeing. And screen time plays into all of those, because if you're not doing extracurricular activities, you're not connecting with friends, you're not going to school, and you're not emancipating step by step from your family, then that's just an added challenge, isn't it? And so they're kind of a great checklist for parents listening to be able to think about. And what do you say to parents who are listening and saying to themselves, "Oh my goodness, we're only ticking one of those boxes," and how do you move forward? Because friendships it can be a tricky one, can't it? Where would you suggest parents start if friendships is an issue for their child and they'd like to support them to build more pro-social relationships?
Well, I mean, I think the first question you have to ask yourself is around whether or not your child is neurotypical, because there are some kids who are neuroatypical for whom friendships aren't the priority. They've got other things that are more important to them. And while I think some of those kids can be quite lonely, there are reasons why they're having difficulty making friends. And unless you address those issues, you're never going to get anywhere. But if you've got a neurotypical kid and they're having difficulty with friendships, and one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is the stress on kids going into year 7 at the moment. I'm very, very focused on that because of the pandemic and the 2 years that they lost in socio-emotional competencies. I'm finding a lot of kids really struggling with that. So in a lot of the talks that I'm giving at schools at the moment, and particularly to year 7s, impending year 7s, I talk about the importance of looking at people, asking them questions, having a curiosity about people and practicing that at home, asking appropriate questions, not having your face in your phone the whole time, and participating in those islands of competence. So even though it might be a bit nerve-wracking, having a go at art, music, dance, drama, sport as a way of making friends and making connections. And I also say that it's very, very important to have friends outside of school. So you've got 2 sets. So I think this is where parents, particularly still in that transition between grade 6 and year 7, parents still have the capacity to be a bit of a social secretary and a bit of a mover and shaker in their kids' lives. And I'm always encouraging the parents to create opportunities for their children to socialise, but also making sure that the kids themselves have the skills and the knowledge and the strategies to make those friendships happen. I think the most important skill is learning to listen, be curious, and have the right body language, head up, shoulders back, and not sort of slink off into a corner.
Yes. Oh, it's brilliant advice. And it is, if you are present in a conversation, my mum, and I speak about her with permission, Michael, she, like me, she has an anxiety disorder. She lives with that too. And sometimes social anxiety will rear up for her where that's not my lot, which you probably noticed.
Yeah,
um, she said it's, and of course, we know this about social anxiety, don't we? That when somebody's feeling anxious about what to say, they're in their head about what can I say next, and therefore they're not able to be present and listen and then just respond with a natural flow. And mum says to me, "How do you do a podcast?" And I said, "Well, I listen, I remain present, I hear what's being said, and I'm so passionate about this. I want to know more." And so it just all happens naturally, but it's not that easy, is it, for some? And so bringing in those strategies that you talked about earlier, the stress breath and being able to become more present, more mindful, so that you are better able to concentrate on just what's happening before you. And that idea of even just being curious and then just asking one question. It's a nice thing to do, just to be able to say, ask one question about it, and then maybe share an example ourselves. But that can get tricky, can't it? Because sometimes people will dive in with their experience of what's just been shared, and that can feel like you're not being heard too, can't it?
absolutely. You talk about social anxiety disorder, which is one of the most common problems that I see clinically. We're talking about a chronic mental health condition in which
Mm.
any social interaction causes this completely irrational anxiety, and the fear and the self-consciousness and the embarrassment is absolutely crippling. It's almost best understood as a fear of people. And obviously, given the importance of peers in the lives of young people, and there's some people, particularly Marty Seligman, the father of positive psychology, he once said that the greatest predictor of well-being in young people wasn't being good looking, being smart, having more good things happen to you than bad. He said the greatest predictor is having this rich repertoire of friends. So we know it's essential for flourishing, to use Marty's term, and therefore giving young people those skills to manage those social interactions is really an investment in their future happiness.
I read a great paper, and the author's surname escapes me, but I'll put it in the show notes along with the other programs you've mentioned. And the title of the paper was fantastic. It was "Scratch a Happy Adult, Find a Socially Connected Childhood." And doesn't that say it all?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I would add to that, particularly given the situation we find ourselves in Australia now, post pandemic, and particularly in Melbourne, that if you can get the friendships going, add to that an island of competence, be that sport or whatever that the kid enjoys, and a real sense of connection with the school, you've got the basis for a very successful trajectory through adolescence, which I think is now more difficult and has more risk factors in it than when you and I were growing up. Because if you and I didn't have, of course, social media, the great envy amplifier, which creates, I think, a lot of anxiety all by itself. I think that if we can get those three things going and parents have that as their agenda, that's a really good basis on which to parent.
It absolutely is. And you've given so much great advice today. Before we finish up, I want to come back to one thing that you said earlier, which was about reassurance, that the reassurance that parents naturally want to offer to try to help their children to feel safe and less anxious. That is something I know I went through with my mum. That was how I grew up, just constant reassurance. And I wonder what your advice would be to parents who can stop for a moment and reflect on they're, because there is this relationship between their children. When anxiety rears its head, the child's anxious, they express their concern, the parent responds. Christopher McCurry calls it the anxiety dance. What's your advice to parents who can recognise that reassurance is a big part of their responsiveness to their anxious child or teen?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is what a lovely human being you are, because you're trying to do what you think is best. And, not everyone, Jodie Richardson, has a PhD. Uh, and the problem is that with reassurance, in the short term, it might actually decrease the parent's anxiety, but in the long term, it creates this vicious cycle that worsens not only your anxiety but the kids and increases their need for even more reassurance. So it really isn't helpful. And I love the idea of an anxiety dance. I haven't heard that before. So if you reflect on what you've been doing and if you ask yourself, how effective is my current strategy in terms of dealing with my child's anxiety, and essentially you kind of reflect on the fact, well, it's not really very helpful at all, then I think going and talking to someone and experimenting with new ways of doing things, using the technology for good rather than bad, and making some really tough decisions, having those courageous conversations with your kid and following through on pushing them a little bit, giving them exposure to the thing that they fear with support. It's a really big thing to ask parents to do. But if they've got a good psychologist, if they've got a good support team, this is treatable. And this treatment works. I've been doing this now for almost 30 years, and it's not a quick fix. It does take some time, but I can promise your listener that it works.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. It's so important to know, because it can feel hopeless when you're parenting an anxious child. You can have thoughts that it's never going to be any different, and worrying about what the future might hold for our children because of what they're struggling with right now. So thank you for saying that and for reassuring parents. It is treatable. It's about getting the right support, which we know is a bit tricky in parts of Australia and parts of other countries because of the demand. But there's so much parents can do. And today you've been able to really talk to the heart of so many things that you would be doing with the patient. And if parents can do this and really get that ball rolling and connect with your work and keep listening to the podcast and really seek that external help through those programs, the Brave program and Mood Gym. So thank you, Michael, for your time today with us. You're so generous, and it's just such a delight to have this time with you. And I'd love for you to please share with our listeners today, how can they follow your work, connect with more of your work, and continue the learning journey with you as well?
Well, probably the most effective way is I have a Twitter account, which I actually use more than anything else, which is just at MCG58. It's pretty old-fashioned to use Twitter, I think, these days, but that's what I do. And if I have a comment to make, I'll probably make it on Twitter and add some resources for people. I want to end by just reminding people that there are 940 Saturdays between your child's birth and them leaving home. And what we do in those 940 Saturdays is just crucial. Particularly, I've got to say, the first 3 years, absolutely crucial. And the importance of playing with your kid, just 100% vital. Anxiety is like eye colour. It runs in families. And once you identify it early and treat it early, you're going to get a much better outcome. For the record, can I thank you, Jodie, for all the great work that you do. I hope we talk on a stage again soon. I've got a feeling Positive Schools are rocking around again, so I might see you again there.
I hope so. Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us today. And please connect with Michael via his Twitter handle. I'll put all of the details of how you can connect with Michael in the show notes. And please, if you are on Apple Podcasts, it'd be just brilliant if you could please subscribe and leave a review. I'd be so grateful. Thank you again for your time. Thank you for sharing this time with both of us, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodie Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.